Alright guys, I just ran since the session's been going, so I've been going for about an hour now, and I've really been trying to get the tune going for you guys. Find something that's safe but reasonably quick. So I went ahead and started with the base aggressive setup and started modifying values, and I'll show you what I have right now. So for me, I was able to take this all the way down to a 53.4. For me personally, it's about a second slower than what I can do with a tune that is what I would consider very unsafe, a very aggressive tune. But I still think this is a better tune than the base aggressive tune for a couple different reasons. You'll notice some weird values in here. For one, the tire temps, or excuse me, the tire PSI is all over the place to start. And that's because this car and this core is so right-hand heavy that you end up getting a lot of heat buildup in the left rear and almost none in the front right. That's just the nature of a course like this. Something I did to try to deal with the fact that the left rear was overheating was I took the toe out of the left rear entirely. I left a little bit in the right rear, and having an asymmetrical setup like this is not usually something you would do, other than perhaps having asymmetrical camber for certain courses with weird banking issues and mid-maxing and blah blah blah. But for this, I left a little bit of toe in the right rear because the right rear has trouble getting heat, and I'm actually kind of abusing that to get a little bit more heat in the right rear, just because that left rear heats up so much more. Having that toe in gets the car gets the left-handers have a little bit better turn in because the tire is pointed inwards, but it's such a small margin you won't really notice it when you're driving. It's just mostly there for tire buildup, tire temperature buildup. For electronics, I left it all stock. You could go up a TC again, anywhere from 5 to 6, maybe even 7. Do what you have to do. ABS I leave on 4. It feels pretty good in this car on 4. Always set your brake pads to 1. I went out and tested at 40 liters just because I wanted to get an idea of how the car balance felt after a couple laps and maybe, you know, midpoint of the race. Tire wear for this thing really wasn't that bad. You can see I came out and did a bunch of different sets, but that in the early set, where is it, set 2, excuse me, tire set 2, you can see this left rear tire was cooking. The front right had almost no problems, and the left rear tire was eroding extremely quick, even 10% faster than the right. So that's with the original tune on the car. I went in and I started tweaking things, and I believe set 6 was the one I just took out for a few laps. And if you notice, the left rear and the right rear wear at this point was fairly similar. Again, this setup here at 0.27 at the most wear and 0.86, I'm trying to get the tire to cool down, and you can see that. So anyways, this was the last one that I used, and I'm getting on track here. It's a lot more even. Next up, let's go over to the mechanical grip. Some pretty significant changes here. First things first, steering ratio set to 15. I want this I want this to have more give in the wheel. At 12, the default, the car is too snappy. It's easy to apply too much corner. You know, you turn too much input, excuse me. And also, as you're trying to ease out of the corners, sometimes that causes more problems again, because you know, as you start to let the wheel recenter itself and bring yourself back to center, having the steering ratio that high can cause a lot of problems. So again, that's something that I turn up to 15. It makes the car more consistent for me. Brake bias, I believe the default is 56. I could be wrong, but I believe the default is 56. I've gone as low as 55. I wouldn't go much lower than 55, but I will say that because I'm the only one out on this track, it's only rubbered to the fast condition. By race time, the track should be rubbered to optimum, in which case you can definitely get away with running 56. You'll get better braking. That being said, it's an ebb and flow. If you bring the brake bias towards the rear more, you're going to get more rear tire buildup, or more rear tire temperature buildup, which could cause a problem. So it really depends on how you want to look at it. going forward in a race, if you're in a race and your rear tires are overheating too much, you can try to turn the brake bias up a little bit towards the front, and only a % or 2, but sometimes that can make a big difference with how much buildup there is, because they don't gain as much temperature in the fore, and that can help. Moving along, let's see, bump stop range, I bumped up to 3 in the front on both sides. I want the car to have a little bit more twist in the front end. I want that car to have more mechanical grip here, because a lot of this track is mechanical grip. You're turning the aero down on the car. For the rear tire, the rear spring rate, I have that minimized down to 117 on either side. I want the rear tires to really be able to flow. I really want them to be able to, I want the rear end of the car to be able to flow and absorb things and really maximize that grip. I don't want this rear end to step out on me, so this is what I went with. This is how I decided to go with it. Just super, super soft. Monza's a bit weird because of the way the chicanes work, and having a soft rear end like this can really let you kind of let the rear end sag and the front end point the car in the direction you want. Having a softer rear end also means that you're able to get on the throttle more aggressively from low speeds. Though typically, almost universally on almost every other track, you want a stiffer rear suspension than front suspension when dealing with a car that has a higher rear weight distribution. So the fact that this car has 58% of its weight in the rear, and has 58% of its weight in the rear, but has 50,000 less Newton meters of stiffness in the rear is an anomaly. But for this set, it works. Bump stop range in the rear, I've set to 60. I think that might be the default. You don't really want to change that too much, because you want the car to be able to squat in the straightaways when the aero is pushing down on the roof of the car, and that helps it keep the wing out of the air and give you better straightaway speed. Rear anti-roll bar was originally at 2, I believe. I dropped this down to 0. I really, really want to maximize the sagginess of the rear end so that you can just kind of point the car in the direction you want to go, and you can be more liberal with throttle. Because as someone who's learning, you're going to really have trouble finding and feeling the grip when you're applying throttle, and in a setup where the rear end is at the extreme spectrum of soft will give you more leeway, more give, more it's less pointed, so you'll be able to do what you need to do. Preload differential, feel free to tweak this between 70 and 90, 60 and 100, in that range. I set mine to 90 because I had an issue with a mid corner when I'd be neutral on the gas and throttle, or excuse me, the gas and the brake. The car would over rotate a little bit for me. So I turned that up to try and reduce some of the over rotation. So down means more rotation when you're off the throttle, and up means less rotation when you're off the throttle. Next up, we have the dampers. I took the bump stop in the front up to 20. I believe this was somewhere else. Bump stop's 20, and the rebound is at 15. This was probably one of the biggest, most noticeable changes I made, was dropping the rebound in the front down a bit. It helps the car be less jerky when you're going from the brake to throttle transition. Same with the rebound in the rear here. I wanted that to be less jerky in that transition, so the rebound is actually 8 in the rear. For the aero, and this is something that's really important with Monza, I decided to run the car flat. If it was me and I was running this like a full-on how to go fast, like super fast tune, I'd be running 0 wing in the rear, and I'd also be running the front end pretty well slammed. I'd be running something like this. But the problem with that is that your aero variation is really high. You've got a lot of weight on the nose, and this can make the car, it'll make the cars turn in better, but it also makes the car more of a driver's car. And it means that you have to try extra hard to get the car to do what you want it to do, and you need a lot more throttle control. It's also less forgiving over the curves because there's less ride height in the front. And there's all these different things that amass to, this is how you go super duper fast. In my opinion, you have more brake to create more downforce in the front. Anyone that watches F1 knows that Red Bull was known for having their car set with a ridiculous amount of rake, but for this, we're taking the rake completely out of the car, and we're going to leave the wing anywhere from 0 to 2. I'm going to leave this in your hands, let you guys figure out what you want to do with that. I set the lap time I'm about to show you with 1 in the rear, but realistically, it could be anything from 2 to 0. Again, if you're going to go super duper ultra mega fast here, I would almost always advise 0 wing. GT3 cars run 0 wing. This thing has some trouble mid-corner, so if you feel you need a little more help, turn rear wing up to 2. I wouldn't go too much higher because it starts to die in the straights. In Monza, you'll lose a lot more time. It would be better to just be slower mid-corner, but you can try 3, but realistically you want to go between 0 and 2, so I split the difference on my time. The last thing I would say is brake ducts. You can leave the front at 4. The brake duct cooling at 4 for this is pretty spot on for the fronts. It keeps everything ideal. You want your brakes to, usually you want them to just start to turn or just be like light blue down a straight, so that way when you're off the brakes in after you get off the brakes in the middle of the corner, if you were to glance down, you want your brakes to be green, but they need to be blue going into the brake zone so that you have the right balance of brake cooling going on. For the rear, however, it's a bit tougher. Bumping this up to 5 really made a difference on tire temps in the rear, but it also made the brakes going down the front stretch in the rear become purple, and they were super duper cool to the point where I could feel that I wasn't stopping good enough anymore. It's really an ebb and flow thing. This entire tune is really designed to try and get the car to keep that left rear cooler so that you lose less grip and you have less wear over time, so that way at the end of the race you have something left to give. But the result that I went with was turning the toe down and doing that. I'll work on it some more during the week. If I find any major breakthrough with keeping the tire really cool, I'll let you guys know.